Hi there, and welcome back to LeanReads, the channel where we share powerful insights and personal growth lessons through great books. If you enjoy what you hear and want to dive deeper, we've included a link to the book in the description below. Now, let's get started. The Nazi Conspiracy 2023 brings to life one of the most gripping and little-known stories of World War II. The secret Nazi plot that nearly changed the course of history. This is the story of the first historic meeting between the three Allied leaders, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin, during the height of the war, through thrilling twists, political intrigue, and international espionage. The book reveals how these three men overcame impossible odds to organize one of the most consequential conferences in modern history. Meltzer and Mensch uncover a true tale that reads like a spy thriller, a covert Nazi operation to assassinate the Allied heads of state before they could finalize their united war strategy. Had the plan succeeded, the balance of the world might have turned forever. Brad Meltzer is a best-selling American author known for his masterful blend of political drama, historical suspense, and deep research. His works include The Lightning Rod, The Escape Artist, and The First Conspiracy. Beyond his novels, Meltzer also hosted popular History Channel shows such as Brad Meltzer, S Decoded, and Brad Meltzer, S Lost History. Josh Mensch is a renowned documentary writer and television producer specializing in historical and political storytelling. Together, Meltzer and Mensch have crafted a trilogy of true conspiracy thrillers: The First Conspiracy, The Lincoln Conspiracy, and now The Nazi Conspiracy, each exploring secret plots that nearly reshaped world events. The year was 1943, and the world was on fire. For 3 years, Europe had been ravaged by the unstoppable advance of Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime. Every day brought new horrors, atrocities that would take decades for history to fully comprehend. The war raged on 3 brutal fronts. In the Pacific, Japan clashed with the United States for dominance after the shocking attack on Pearl Harbor. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, America's 32nd president, faced the immense challenge of fighting a global war on multiple fronts. In the Mediterranean and North Africa, the Allied forces, British, American, and Canadian troops, battled against Italy and its Axis partners. Prime Minister Winston Churchill called this front the soft underbelly of the Axis, hoping that defeating Italy would open a path into Nazi-occupied Europe. In the East, Hitler's armies launched a ferocious invasion of the Soviet Union. Millions perished in some of the bloodiest battles in human history. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin suffered catastrophic losses and desperately sought relief from his Western allies. Amid this global chaos, one critical plan began to take shape: the first meeting of the Big Three. If Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin could sit together and coordinate a unified strategy, the Allies might finally turn the tide of the war. But such a meeting was perilous, and in the shadows, the Nazis were preparing their boldest operation yet: a plan to assassinate all 3 leaders at once. Codenamed Operation Long Jump, the Nazi plot was designed to decapitate the Allied command in one swift strike, potentially rewriting the entire history of the 20th century. Meltzer and Mensch transform historical fact into a cinematic experience, weaving archival evidence, declassified intelligence, and personal accounts into a story that reads like a Hollywood thriller. Accept it as all true. The book reminds us that the course of history often hinges on the smallest decisions, the quietest conversations, and the courage of people we may never know by name. Behind every global alliance lies distrust, sacrifice, and risk. And behind every victory, 100 unseen battles in the shadows. The events leading to the historic conference, Unconditional Surrender, that was President Franklin D. Roosevelt's thunderous declaration in Morocco, early 1943, spoken to the world during a press conference following his first face-to-face meeting with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. For the global audience, the statement was electrifying. It was a bold promise. There would be no negotiated peace with Nazi Germany. The war would not end until fascism itself was utterly destroyed. Even Churchill was taken aback. The British Prime Minister had not been informed in advance that Roosevelt would make such a sweeping, uncompromising announcement. Yet, bound by friendship and the shared necessity of Allied unity, he quickly echoed Roosevelt's message. Together, the two declared that the Axis powers would accept nothing less than complete and unconditional surrender, a turning point in Allied strategy. The Casablanca Conference, known as the Morocco meeting, marked a decisive moment in shaping Allied strategy and in presenting a unified public front to the world. But to Roosevelt, the conference felt incomplete. One crucial figure was missing: Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader. Stalin had long been urging the Western allies, the United States and Britain, to open a second front in Western Europe, ideally by invading northern France. Such a move, he argued, would force Hitler to divert troops from the bloody Eastern Front, where the Soviet Union had been suffering catastrophic losses. While Churchill didn't openly reject the idea, he skillfully delayed it. His preference was to focus on what he called the soft underbelly of the Axis, Italy, and the Mediterranean, hoping that weakening southern Europe would eventually lead to Germany's downfall without the extreme risk of a direct invasion across the English Channel. For Stalin, this was a source of deep frustration. The Soviet Red Army had borne the brunt of the fighting and the casualties in Europe. What he wanted now was not patience, but action, the need for unity. Roosevelt understood something vital. The Allies could not win the war divided. He needed to soothe Stalin's mistrust, energize Churchill's determination, and forge a sense of shared purpose among the three great powers. To do so, he began a steady correspondence with Stalin, diplomatic letters filled with warmth, encouragement, and subtle persuasion. In those exchanges, Roosevelt proposed what had never before been attempted: a three-way, in-person meeting between the leaders of the Allied powers. Such a summit, Roosevelt believed, could change the trajectory of the war, and perhaps the world. A series of military turning points. Several critical events soon accelerated the push toward this meeting. First, joint intelligence efforts between British and Soviet agencies exposed and thwarted a secret German offensive before it could unfold. Next came the Allied invasion of Sicily, a daring operation that shook the Axis alliance to its core. The campaign culminated in the arrest of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, a symbolic and strategic victory that signaled the unraveling of fascism in southern Europe. Buoyed by these triumphs, Roosevelt seized the opportunity to strengthen his bond with Stalin. sending congratulatory messages, promises of military aid, and renewed commitments to cooperation. At last, Stalin agreed. A direct meeting between the big three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, would finally take place. After an extended exchange of letters, Stalin himself proposed the location, Tehran, the capital of Iran, then under Allied control. It was a decision that would bring all three leaders into the same room, and, unbeknownst to them, directly into the sights of a Nazi assassination plot that could have changed history forever. The Nazi spy network in Iran, 2 years earlier, in 1941, when Germany launched its surprise invasion of the Soviet Union, Moscow wasted no time in securing its vulnerable borders. Iran quickly became a country of immense strategic importance, ruled by a pro-German government and home to a critical railway line that could serve as a lifeline for the United States and Britain to supply the Soviets. To prevent Germany from exploiting the region, Soviet forces swiftly entered Tehran, toppled the existing government, and installed a pro-Russian administration. Caught in the chaos were two Nazi spies, Franz Mayer and his ally Roman Gomotha, suddenly cut off from Berlin. With no guidance or communication, the agents found themselves trapped behind enemy lines. Gomotha tried to escape across the border into Turkey. Mayer, however, made a fateful decision. He would stay. Throughout 1942, Mayer lived in disguise, moving constantly between safe houses and rural villages. Quietly, he began to rebuild, creating a clandestine resistance network to serve the Nazi cause from within Iran. Months later, Mayer picked up a strange broadcast on his radio, a series of repeated words and coded phrases. It was confirmation. Berlin had received his earlier transmissions. Mayer's message had included requests for money, wireless equipment, and maps identifying safe landing zones near Tehran. The Nazi intelligence headquarters, led by Walter Schellenberg, head of the SD's Foreign Intelligence Division and protege of the notorious Reinhard Heydrich, was relieved to know a loyal operative had survived in Iran. Schellenberg quickly formed a special six-man unit to re-establish contact. The team, commanded by a seasoned paratrooper named Karl Korel, parachuted into the Iranian desert under the cover of night. But they landed far to the south, miles from their target. Determined, Korel crossed the vast desert on foot to find Mayer, then trekked back to guide the rest of his men and retrieve their radio transmitters and supplies. Finally, Mayer's network was complete. He was once again connected to Berlin, and now armed with resources, manpower, and direct communication. By mid-1943, Iran had become one of the most dangerous places in the world for the Allies, a crossroads of espionage, sabotage, and politics that would soon become the center of a global drama. Historians still debate how or when Nazi intelligence first learned about the upcoming Allied meeting. Previously, the German spy network had completely missed the Casablanca Conference between Roosevelt and Churchill. When they intercepted chatter about an event in Casablanca, they mistranslated the Spanish words casa, house, and blanca, white, and mistakenly concluded that the meeting would take place at the White House in Washington, D.C. After that humiliation, Hitler's intelligence chiefs were determined never to be caught off guard again. So, when word began circulating about a possible summit in Tehran, the Nazis launched a new top-secret mission, Operation Norma. This mission had two main pillars. The first was Roman Gamotha, the same agent who had fled Iran 2 years earlier and now resurfaced to lead the operation. The second was Otto Skorzeny, at that time one of the most feared men in Europe, personally chosen by Hitler for his daring exploits. Skorzeny had recently led the spectacular rescue of Benito Mussolini, flying a glider directly into enemy-held territory to free the fallen Italian dictator. That success earned him Hitler's complete trust, and any mission involving Skorzeny was automatically of the highest priority. The collapse of Mayer's network. But as the Tehran summit drew closer, the Nazi spy network in Iran began to unravel. Karl, the paratrooper who had risked everything to reach Mayer, died suddenly of typhoid fever. Unable to dispose of the body discreetly, Mayer's men had to dismember it with a hacksaw and conceal it in backpacks before fleeing through the desert. Their luck ran out soon after. Soviet intelligence in Tehran had been monitoring their movements. One by one, the members of Mayer's network were captured. Franz Mayer himself was arrested and interrogated by Soviet counterintelligence. At first glance, it appeared the Nazi plot was finished. But it wasn't. Not entirely. A shadow still lurking. When President Franklin D. Roosevelt finally arrived in Tehran, preparing for his historic meeting with Churchill and Stalin, Allied intelligence delivered an alarming message. 6 Nazi agents were still believed to be at large somewhere in the city. These men had a working radio transmitter, and they were expected to make contact with none other than the most dangerous man in Europe, Otto Skorzeny himself. The game was not over. It was only about to begin. The presidential motorcade sped through the streets of Tehran, en route to one of the most critical meetings of the entire war. At its center rode a long, dark sedan, the one everyone believed carried President Franklin D. Roosevelt. But that wasn't true. In reality, Roosevelt was hidden inside a far less conspicuous vehicle, following a completely different route through Tehran's backstreets. At the last moment, his chief of security had made a bold decision to avoid the obvious motorcade and keep the president out of the enemy's line of sight. Since the United States had no formal embassy in Tehran, Roosevelt was forced to stay in a small diplomatic compound on the opposite side of the city, far from the British and Soviet embassies where Churchill and Stalin were lodged. That meant every movement between his residence and the conference site exposed him to potential danger. Fortunately, all 3 leaders arrived safely. Yet safety did not guarantee harmony. The conference began under less than ideal circumstances. Churchill, suffering from a cold and irritation, felt increasingly sidelined as the discussions turned toward the long-debated cross-channel invasion of northern France. Tension escalated when Stalin, in his characteristic dark humor, proposed that hundreds of captured German officers should be executed. The remark infuriated Churchill, who stormed out until Roosevelt calmed him, explaining it was only a joke. That night, the 3 men retreated to their private quarters, exhausted and wary. Roosevelt, advised to minimize risk, moved into the Soviet embassy for the remainder of the summit. But as he debriefed his close aides, he was unaware of a chilling reality. Tiny microphones had been hidden throughout the room, in the walls, under the rugs, even inside the furniture. Somewhere nearby, someone was listening. During the conference, Soviet intelligence uncovered the presence of 6 Nazi agents hiding in Tehran. The spies operated from a safe house near the conference zone, maintaining their radio contact with Berlin and awaiting the arrival of elite commandos led by Otto Skorzeny, the most dangerous man in Europe. Rather than strike immediately, the Soviets chose patience. They hoped to capture or kill Skorzeny himself once he arrived. But with all 3 Allied leaders now in Tehran, the risk became intolerable. Within the first 2 days of the summit, Soviet security forces raided the Nazi safe house, capturing the agents inside. To mislead Berlin, they allowed one of the captured operators to send a final transmission, a coded message indicating the mission had been compromised. It worked. Any further Nazi units planning to infiltrate Tehran were ordered to stand down. By the final day of the conference, November the 30th, 1943, which happened to be Churchill's 69th birthday, the danger had passed, though none of the Allied leaders fully realized it. Perhaps buoyed by Roosevelt's encouragement, Churchill appeared in better spirits. That morning, under the bright Persian sun, the British Prime Minister threw his full support behind the long-awaited cross-channel invasion, the plan that would later be known as D-Day. In the days that followed, newspapers around the world printed the now iconic image of the Big Three sitting side by side for the first time. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin united at last. The road ahead was still perilous, but their unity marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's Third Reich. As the saying goes, the rest became history. The direct outcome of that meeting led to June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted. More than 5,300 ships, 1,500 tanks, 12,000 aircraft, and 150,000 troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. The cost was devastating. Thousands of Allied casualties, but the foothold in France was secured, and the liberation of Europe had begun. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Soviet army pushed relentlessly into Germany. The Nazi war machine, now split and cornered, began to collapse. Hitler retreated into his Berlin bunker. Realizing the inevitable, he ended his life with a single gunshot. The Big Three would meet one final time on February 4th, 1945, at the Yalta Conference to shape post-war Europe. By then, the toll of war had consumed them all, especially Roosevelt. Weary and frail, he carried the weight of victory, but not the chance to witness it. Just 2 months later, on April 12, 1945, while sitting for a portrait, Franklin D. Roosevelt collapsed and never regained consciousness. He did not live to see the peace he had fought so hard to secure. In the Nazi conspiracy, Brad Meltzer and Josh Mensch unveil not only a secret assassination plot, but also the fragile machinery of trust that held the Allied powers together. Behind the diplomacy and the military triumphs were men haunted by exhaustion, ambition, and fear. Roosevelt's quiet determination, Churchill's restless pride, Stalin's ruthless pragmatism. The story serves as a powerful reminder that even in times of absolute darkness, survival depends not just on strength, but on unity and on the delicate dance between courage and caution. Every decision made in those rooms in Tehran rippled through history. D-Day, the fall of Berlin, and the shape of the modern world. It was a moment when a handful of people, flawed, human, and vulnerable, decided the fate of millions. The Nazi conspiracy captures that truth with suspense and humanity, It tells us that history isn't distant. It's made by choices and by those who dare to make them.